do it!
Oh no.
Yes!
The Tactical Warfare Avoidance Technique, or TWAT for short, works on 4 basic principles. 1. Move early and prioritize team integrity. 2. Predict and avoid the main areas of conflict. 3. Let the other teams eliminate each other. And 4. Crush them when they're at their weakest. And right off the bat, I can tell you that this strategy has 2 main downsides. It's not the most fun, and it's not the best way to learn. If you want to have fun and you want to learn, you know what to do. Drop at school, don't avoid conflict, instead seek it. That, in my opinion, is the quickest and fastest way to get better at the game and also to have the most fun. This strategy is purely designed to win, but that being said, it also has many benefits. One of them, of course, is the high win rate that you will get, but also the fact that your team will be mostly safe. You will either win together or lose together. No more sitting in your room for 20 minutes while your teammates try to win the game for you, or having to back out because one of you guys died early. This strategy is also perfect for people who experience a lot of early game lag, as well as for the people that have very low FPS when landing and simply cannot take on a fight early on. During my time streaming this game and playing with lots of people who are new to the game, I have also found that this strategy is perfect for beginners. So if you're still struggling to get your first victory, or if you're playing with someone who's just been introduced to PUBG, do yourself a favor and keep watching, because you're about to make your life a lot easier. Understanding how the zone functions is one of the most important skills that you can have in PUBG. However, many people who have played this game for hundreds of hours still don't seem to fully understand it, so let's have a little recap. About a minute after everyone is off the plane, the first circle will appear on the map. This one is about 4.5 kilometers in diameter, and there's nothing special about it. 10 minutes later, and the first circle is completely closed, and somewhere inside we get the second one. The second circle is kind of special, because its diameter is exactly 65% of the first one. All the other circles, from the third until the 8th and last, have exactly 50% of the previous one's diameter. And as I'm sure everybody knows by now, with each consecutive circle, the damage outside of the blue becomes higher. In fact, if we compare all the damages, we can reach some interesting conclusions. Circles 1 to 3, the damage is extremely low and can be easily out-healed with bandages. Unless you're miles away from the zone, you should be alright. Circles 6 to 8, on the other hand, are completely brutal, but usually by this time the zone is pretty small and everyone is aware of this, so most of the time it's not really a problem. Circles 4 to 5 though, this is the interesting bit. The transition from these circles is completely mental. As soon as the 4th circle closes and the 5th one shows up, the damage from the zone is triple, and you go from being able to survive for almost 2 minutes to dying in about half. If you've ever died to the zone because suddenly it started to kill you really fast, I can guarantee you that 9 times out of 10 it was this zone. This transition from the 4th to the 5th circle is very important for the strategy, but don't worry about it for now because we'll go into details later. Right now, all we need to know is that even though the location of the circles is completely random, there are some things that are not random. For instance, if you're in the very center of a circle, you can know for sure that you're going to be in the next one, because no matter where it goes, since it's at least half the diameter, you're always going to be in it. Also, be on the lookout for circles like this. We know that the center of the next circle can never spawn on top of water, so even though the circle covers both sides, we already know which one it will end up, since it can really not spawn in the north one. Keep these rules in mind, and sometimes you'll be able to predict where the next circle will be, and make a move before anyone else does. The way that players move around the map is not a simple mechanic that you can memorize, but instead a mix of basic psychology and lots of guesswork. After hosting many private games with random people and carefully analyzing what they do, I've come to the conclusion that players, for the most part, are fundamentally predictable. Here's some of the things that I've learned. At the start of the match, people tend to drop in compounds by the middle of the flight path, obviously. People also tend to drop in high-profile areas earlier, rather than later. So basically, if the flame flies above 70, there will be a lot more people dropping if it flies there first, rather if it's coming from, say, the military base or Pochinki. People also very rarely fly more than 1 kilometer away from the plane, especially now that the parachuting distance has been nerfed. In pretty much every game, you'll find that almost all players drop within this radius. And finally, people generally stay close to the place where they drop until the zone pushes them. So knowing all of this, we can get a very good idea of where most people will be when the match starts. All we have to do is the following. Remember the flight path and put a mental marker around the compounds that are nearby. Look out for the bigger compounds inside the zone that you think people might go to, and also put a mental marker on them. And every time the zone shrinks, just pull the mental markers from their position towards the zone until they're inside. And that's it. This is how, in theory, you predict where people will go. Let's watch an actual match and see how this holds up. This game right here is a great example of how predictable player movement is. You can see many players dropping off the plane, picking big locations both at the start and around the middle of the map, and pay attention to the way they spread around. The rule that most players stay within 1 kilometer radius of the flight path holds true. A few seconds later, the first zone appears, and we can see that most players are settled down. 5 minutes after the first circle was announced, we can see that the players have barely moved at all. In fact, no one even bothered to go to the biggest city in the map to do any looting, and this care package that dropped in it went completely unlooted for the rest of the game. Another 5 minutes later, and we can see that the players are now rushing to the zone, but only because they are being pushed by the blue. And pay attention to the lower half of the circle, the part of the circle that was further away from the flight path. You will notice that unlike the other sides of the circle, this is extremely safe because no one even bothers to get this far. In fact, there only seems to be one player who has gone the extra mile and is looting on the lower half of the circle. This guy right here. And I want you to remember his name, if that's even fucking possible. A couple minutes later, we can see that this trend still continues. Most of the people are within the half of the circle that was closest to the flight path, and we only see 1 or 2 that are deviating from the rest. Even though many of the players around this area did really well and had a lot of early kills, most of them died to each other just because there were so many of them. Whenever someone got into a gunfight, 2 other people were alerted, and people quickly eliminated one another, whereas this guys on the opposite side experienced no resistance whatsoever. But all of that is going to change very quickly. When you see that the blue circle becomes smaller than 1 kilometer in diameter, that's the 5th circle about to kick in. And this is the point where the zone triples in damage and people can't really be outside anymore. And as you can see, most of the players don't cluster up on the same spot anymore, but instead they spread around evenly in the new zone. And because of this, it will be at this point that our strategy will have to change. But more on that later. For now, let's focus our attention on this fucking guy. The one guy who won the entire match without seeing anybody or killing anyone. How did he manage to win? Let's find out. The avoidance phase encompasses everything you will do from the start of the game until the 5th circle. The single most important step that you must take when the game starts is to find a vehicle. You don't want to drop too early or too late, so drop somewhere around the middle of the flight path and don't be afraid to parachute for a while if it's necessary. If you're playing with other people, have your entire team spread out in a small area with a high likelihood of having vehicles, and don't even waste any time looting. If you have a hard time knowing where to find vehicles, I'm gonna put the spots that I use all the time in the description if you want to check that out. As soon as everyone is in a car, start driving away from the flight path and find a good place to loot that's really far away from it. Around this point, the first circle will appear on the map, and we're gonna have to adapt depending on where it is. If your looting location is within the circle or very close to it, while still being far away from the flight path, perfect. Go for it and take your time looting it. If your location is within the circle but happens to be right in the center, you can either pick a different location or loot it really fast and then go away. And lastly, if your location is completely away from the circle, you're gonna have to travel back to it. So instead of wasting lots of time looting far away, get some basic loot somewhere and then drive back to the circle and continue looting in the safest areas that you can find. Since most of the time you're gonna have quite a bit of time to loot in peace, you wanna make sure that your resources are spread evenly. For instance, you don't want one of your teammates to have 2 shotguns while you have 2 sniper rifles. You don't need amazing loot to win, but you have to play your cards right, and keeping some balance across the team is very important. As the zones close and new circles appear, you want to keep a low profile and keep relocating into the next zone, always trying to stay on the side of the circle that's furthest away from the flight path. During this movement, you might bump into other teams, and it's up to you to decide if you want to be aggressive, but remaining undetected, especially later on, helps a lot. So I would say that you have to pick your battles very carefully. At some point, when the blue zone becomes smaller than 1 kilometer, we have reached the 5th circle, and as we saw earlier, when this circle closes, the damage from the zone triples, and being outside for long becomes impossible. This is also the moment when our strategy changes completely. The sweep phase begins when the 4th circle has completely closed up and your team is ready to move. At this point of the game, teams are forced to go inside the zone or die in seconds, so you'll start to hear a lot more gunfights in the distance. As we saw in the previous examples, this is also the moment when teams start to spread out within the circle, so we have to change our approach. Sitting still doesn't work anymore. And again, how we do this will depend on what kind of circle we get. If the circle happens to be right on top of us, we can postpone the sweep phase for a bit, and since you don't have to move, just don't engage with anyone and try to be stealthy. Securing a good position is important, but from my experience, remaining completely undetected is even better, because it will force the remaining people to fight each other and it will thin their numbers. If the circle is close to the edge of the zone, this is when we begin the sweep. hug the blue and advance into the zone together. Obviously you can go either left or right. Most of the time you'll want to go for the shorter path, but if your judgment tells you that it's better to go the other way, go for it. If you've got a full squad, you can have one person have your back, one look towards the center, and two look in front. If you're playing duos, have one person look into the front, and the other alternate between the other directions as you move. If you're on your own, well, you're gonna have to do your best to look at every possible direction while you move. At this point of the game, it's no longer viable to be outside of the zone, so when you move forward, you're basically advancing into the zone while you create a secured area that you can fall back to if necessary. There will also be times when the next circle will be right in the middle, and in these situations you have to figure out what's the best path to get into it, and either do it fast or approach it slowly when the circle closes, but only if you think that it's safe enough. You never want to get into a messy fight when the zone is against you. If you've been playing your cards right, there should only be a few teams left, and eventually you're gonna have to come across one of them. At this point, strategy doesn't really mean that much, so simply adapt to the situation and do whatever you must to win. If you play duos or squads and your entire team is still alive, you're gonna have a massive advantage over teams with missing members, so again, try to focus targets one at a time and you'll have a great chance of pulling through. Now that I've told you everything that I know, the way you implement it is ultimately up to you. You can show this video to your teammates and have everyone follow it by the book, or you can just keep the information in mind and use it whenever you feel it's appropriate. From my own experience, the principles behind this strategy apply to all game modes, but they definitely work better in squads and duos. If you're more of a solo player, you might want to watch my hunting video, since that one is the exact opposite. It works better the less people there are.